Welcome, I'm Bill Wake. This is my summary of the weekly work we've done on Twitch. We're working on a personal finance tool I'm calling Fiume. This past week we focused on editing, so we edited people, streams, groups, and scenarios, basically all the objects that we had active. Then we added pools, which is the idea of assets or liabilities. So up till now we've had streams like income or expenses or house payment or whatever. And with this, we've got things like savings accounts and 401ks and mortgages. All right. So pools and streams turned out to be very, very similar. In fact, as far as the actual contents, they're the same. People use them differently. Other objects use them differently depending whether they're a pool or a stream. But the classes themselves were basically identical. So we did some refactoring, we pulled them into one class, and then we made sure that everybody that used it, if they cared which kind it was, we made sure they kept track of it. All right, so let's see some demo and some code. All right, so this is an empty setup. Let's go ahead and create a stream. All right, so now we have pool there, but stream, we'll give it a name, job 1. It's an income. Maybe it pays $2,000 a month. And we'll just say it starts whenever we start counting. So we'll create that. It creates a scenario. If you earn $2,000 a month for 30 years, you'll have a pile of almost $750,000. Great. Okay, now that was creating an empty instance. Now we'd like to edit the existing instance. That's the thing we did this week. So it brings up the previous contents and we can change whatever we want in it. Let's say we got a raise. Okay, so update. Now notice this says update instead of originally it said create. So now it's update, and we can see now we got $2,005 a month and it's called salary now. So we basically repeated that pattern for all the things you can edit. All right, now the pool, the difference here, there's really no difference on this screen. The only difference is the effect. Once you create it, you now have an asset. So let's give ourselves some savings, and maybe we have $20,000 in savings. Create that. Okay, it's got a slightly different color. It's got a different icon. Eventually, I want the word asset or income on this line so we know exactly which kind it is. Now, if you start off with $50,000, we don't implement putting that in your net worth yet. That's the piece we have to do next week. But what should happen is this line should move up. The starting point should be $50,000, reflecting your or $20,000, reflecting your savings. And month to month, there's no accumulation like there is with salary. It's more just you said you had this money and here's where it is. It's a pile or a pool of money. So the big one, and this was the result of refactoring, this originally was struct stream, and we created another one that was pool that ended up being more or less identical. We realized the duplication along the way and fixed that before we went to the whole route of creating everything. But the key thing is you've got a null object you can start with when you create things, but you have these fields that represent the information. There's a unique identifier we don't display on the screen, the name, the amount, the first and last dates. Okay, and to initialize those, you just copy in those fields. There's nothing special there. The usage, there's a complicated calculation for depending on what the start dates and end dates are. And we have several ways of specifying both those. So there's some complexity here. What I realized as we pulled this together is most of this is driven by the first and last date. They're the thing we're switching on. And that suggests to me that there's kind of a missing object that represents that range. And that object should probably own this method or at least some variant of it. So we kind of we pulled it out. That showed up in our pool. We referenced this class or this this function in there. But, having it separated out, I can see like, no, this is most of the stuff on here it's looking at is driven by the dates. Okay, then the other thing we did was around editing. And so, well, you have this null for the case of create, but let's look at the case of editing. So this is the view that's going to do the work to edit a stream, like we popped up on that second window. You have dismiss, so there's dismiss button. But the key thing is, in the pattern we used is, this view is trying to edit some sort of object. Let's pass in that object. So you'll pass in a null if you're doing a create, so it has some defaults, or you'll pass in the existing object if it's an existing one you want to alter. And then the other two things we always pass in on these editing views, one is the button name, because that can be create or update. And the second is the action. So what do you want to do once you've produced this new thing? So we basically take whatever's on the screen. So there are text fields and pickers and date specifiers and so on. We take those and we turn them into a Leia object. That's the job of this code, this view. And then it passes that on to the action it was given. Given this Leia object, what are you going to do with it? Okay, we'll see an example of that in a minute. But first off, you can see we copy these fields in from the incoming stream. So these are the editable fields. Yeah, state down here, I guess. All those fields, determine what the current value is while you're editing. Okay, and let me skip the coloration stuff. The interesting thing is when we hit the button, so you have your button, the name goes in there, and then the action is in this closure. What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to, well, that should be a Leia, I guess. Okay, what are you going to do? Well, I'm supposed to create a Leia object given the values in the current editing values. And so I build that object and I pass it to the action routine that was passed into me that actually stores it in the system. And then I dismiss the dialog. So this dismiss matches up to that environment dismiss up top. All right, but notice there's no references to plans or scenarios or persistence or any of that stuff. That's all put on the caller to say, what do you want to do with this thing now that you have it? And so the caller, when it's doing a create, well, it builds a new object and it stores it in the appropriate places. So you're doing an edit, well, we change existing objects. Okay, so here's add plan view. This is the one that creates a view from scratch. Okay, and that's the first extra window I opened. And so we say, okay, I want this one, if it's a stream, I want to have a stream view. And it'll be edit stream view because that's the same thing edits and creates. We pass in a null entry, so default value has no name and 0 amount and so on, and the button create. And finally, this last closure is an implicit last argument that's our action. And the action is, if you give me back the stream that you create from this, I will append it in the plans. I'll tell the parent that here's your new child. And that one comes from there. Okay, so add plan gave us create. Stream view gives us the existing view. And so it's got the image, the text, the months, and so on, the amounts. But the big thing is, it's got an edit button. So if you press edit, that corresponds to that little square, with a pencil pointing at it. And that triggers a view down here. If we set edit presented to true, it shows this sheet. So it pops a sheet on top with the editing stuff. Again, it's edit stream view. It's the stream we're looking at this time, not a null one. The button name is update. And the action is, you're given a stream. Well, tell the plans object to replace the existing plan, replace the stream in the existing plan. And so that effectively stores the edit. And, there's no There's no notification. Well, part of plans.replace is it marks the plans object change, so the persistence later on knows to change it. All right, so what's next? Well, we didn't include the pools in that net worth calculation, and it certainly should be. In some ways, we care more about that, but I guess in the long run, you have to care about both. So at any rate, whatever your assets or liabilities should either add or subtract and affect your net worth. I don't think that's going to take too long. I pretty much think it's 2 lines of code in 2 lines of production code and a couple more test lines. So I think the rest of that session, we're going to spend some ways. We want to speed up our tests. It takes a fair bit of time. When you run your tests, they actually start the simulator, bring up an empty view, and then bounce into your test and run those. But we don't really care about that view. So we've seen 2 ways people talk about speeding it up. One is you can create an empty app, and so there's no real view to show, and it'll take less time to do it. But you still have to spin up a simulator for it, so there's going to be overhead for that. There's a second way someone proposed that if you put things in frameworks, it doesn't bring up the simulator. I'm not sure how that will work or if that's true. There seemed to be some skepticism, but it gives us another way. Maybe we can get rid of the simulator start. That would be really nice, since we're using pure unit tests that they are not involving the UI at all. Okay, then I mentioned we had the start and end date. They probably could be a single object, and we have at least one method that uses the intelligence from them. And finally, there are places I'd like labels to be better. So I mentioned I have an icon, but I don't really say asset or liability or whatever, and I've messed that up at least multiple times today anyway. So we want to get those, tweak things here and there where we can to make those better. All right, well, if you'd like to join us, we're on Twitch Monday through Thursday, usually 2 to 4:30 Eastern or 6 to 8:30 p.m. UTC. I say usually because next week's going to be a short week. I'm only going to be available Monday and no Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But if you want to join us at that time, go to xp123.com/Twitch, takes you to the live session, or you can go to xp123.com/YouTube, and I think it's a week, 2 weeks, something like that behind. They're lightly edited, but you can watch those anytime. You'll just be a little bit behind us. All right, well, thanks for watching. Hope I catch you sometime. The following week, I'll be back on my normal schedule.